In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Hello, Sublation Media viewers and readers and listeners and people, fellow commies. It is I'm here again, Douglas Lain.
And Ashley Frawley. Ashley Frawley. Damn
Frawley.
it, I almost had it there. Come on.
And this week we're going to be talking about feminism. We're responding to an essay in Sublation magazine called "The Real Roots of the Dangerous but Resistible Rise of Anti-Feminism" by Arturo Desimone. I think I should say his name. And I'm very pleased to be able to talk about this. He brings up that. Well, I'll give a quick summary of the essay because Ashley said it was my turn. What he's writing about here is the way in which I'm going to say progressive or liberal feminism and the approach that even the left takes towards issues around gender helps to produce a reaction, and how the abandonment of masculine qualities, the labeling of masculinity in total as toxic, produces a left that can't organize to overcome class, and that's basically the thesis and the argument made in the article. How'd I do, Ashley?
Yeah. I mean, there's also it's quite a long essay with lots to kind of get into, a lot of points that can be kind of picked apart and contested a little bit. But yeah, so that's the kind of overarching argument, and it's something that it really touches on a lot of issues that I've wanted to have in the magazine for a while, including do we need a left that's capable of speaking to young men? Because that's something like toward the start of the essay that Arturo kind of really touches on or hits on, which is that all of these problems are dismissed as, oh, well, it's just people sort of living up to these, they live within these sort of toxic, violent kind of cultural, and that's what winds up producing high suicide rates or violence and this sort of thing. And so what? And do we need a narrative that's capable of giving meaning to people, to men, that speaks to this bottomless pit of meaninglessness that seems to characterize a lot of people's lives? So I think that it kind of touches on some of these issues that I think are bigger and more and very, very interesting in and of themselves.
Yeah, I wrote down some comments and questions and things for us to explore as I reread the article this morning. And I guess what I would start with, given what you just said, is that my concern about some of the suggestions or questions raised by the essay is that we are still stuck in campaign mode. When we ask a question like, oh, can the left talk to or speak to young men? What do we have to tell them? Or are we listening to them enough about their concerns? It seems to me what we're kind of assuming or taking for granted is that the aim is to get them to, I don't know, vote for a leftist candidate, or perhaps to get organized in some sort of leftist cause or a rally. I'm for that, but I don't think that the major problem that the left has is communication. I think that it starts internally. I recently interviewed David Swift, and he's wrote a book called A Left for Itself. And when he was critiquing the left for being more concerned about their own prestige within a milieu than they were about changing the world. But I think we need a left for itself, not so much that we need to be concerned about our social status within a milieu, but we need to form a leftist project. we need to figure out what we're actually aiming to accomplish, and have a conversation that is aiming outside of ourselves by figuring out what our own values are and what our own aims and ambitions are. And I think if we have that conversation on the left, honestly, that in itself will be attractive to young men, young women, older men. That there's a common. We can just start with the assumption that people want to make changes. They want to try to overcome the conditions that they're in, and we don't need to learn to talk to them about their conditions. The problem with the approach taken by progressive liberals is that progressive liberals don't start with the assumption that something fundamentally needs to change structurally, unless it is cultural, unless it's some sort of attitudinal change that needs to take place, or a change to cultural norms. Those things that they tend to want to do something about. But beyond that, the assumption is that the system could work, that there's nothing fundamentally broken about, say, the material conditions in society, or the way we produce the world, or the economy, or even the political system necessarily, unless those things, again, are couched in cultural terms.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. What you want to avoid is not like, oh gosh, our movement, perfect though it is, isn't really reaching this demographic. How do we really spice things up to appeal to the male demographic? No, that's not what you want to do.
Right.
You have to understand that part of the problem that we are trying to understand, trying to overcome, is a lack of purpose, a sense of normlessness, a sense that there is no future, that is felt by different parts of society as a whole and in different ways. There is generally this abyss that separates the present from the future, a future that we kind of have an inkling is possible, could be better than is today, but is constantly being thwarted by all sorts of things beyond, outside of our control. And we live in that kind of, on the edge of that abyss, always with the threat of being tossed down into it. And instead of grappling with that and reckoning with that, what we wind up doing is deferring those kinds of questions of how do we get to that future? What sorts of things do we need to fight for in order to move forward as a society? Instead, it's like bitching at people about their lifestyles, about their values, and so on. And that winds up being the major outlook that people see as coming from the left. Who's a leftist? Is someone who's going to scream at you for saying the wrong words or whatever. That becomes the sort of cultural vision. And what's necessary, and this is just kind of what human beings need, is a future-oriented project from which you derive meaning. And I always use this example of these quotes, but most people do not live as though they had one life to live. They lived as though they were living their parents' lives and their children's lives. And we don't feel that anymore. We feel a break. There's a break between the past and the future. We feel ourselves kind of floating around with a sense of meaninglessness. And so there's nothing beyond ourselves from which we are able to derive meaning. In fact, our culture tells us that the self is the end point of all meaning, which feeds into a lot of our leftist movements. It's about self-actualization. It's a lifestyle brand. It's a project of defining who you are. And so the anchor of meaning is no longer located beyond yourself in some future. You are no longer at a point that stretches back into the past, moves into the future. You are all that there is. And that's a really empty place to be. It's a really shallow place to find meaning. And what we need to develop is a project that is capable of exciting everyone for different reasons. And I always think, if you go back to someone like Condorcet, who is writing about, all of human history, you get this sense that he found himself at a point in history that was ephemeral, that was passing. And he even was killed in the terror, right? during the French Revolution. And yet still he was so perilously optimistic, because all of humanity was progressing toward a future in which want would be abolished, and where everything that all the inequalities that had characterized past societies were a distant memory, because we were going to figure out all of this stuff. It was just a matter of time. We don't have that anymore. We don't have that anymore. This is it. This is the end. There's nothing beyond this. We need to take back a little bit of that perilous optimism of someone like Condorcet, who's sort of capable of thinking about the future as something better that's worth fighting for, instead of this endless presentism and kind of policing that characterizes leftist movements now.
Yeah, I just want to point out, you mentioned that the left has become a lifestyle brand, and Jason Miles' article is a contemporary left lifestyle brand. It is currently up on Sublation magazine. People should check that out as well as the one we're discussing today. I do think you're right that I kind of think, on the one hand, you're right that we are sold the idea that we ourselves are the end of the line, that our task is to break from the past and to create a future without, any clear idea of what that future is going to be. And the old approach to life, where you were living your parents' life again, helping to set up a continuation in your children, has to a large degree passed away, especially amongst, say, the educated upper to middle class segment of society. Although even there, I'm not so sure. I think that we pay lip service to this idea of a break, but we often find ourselves, especially once we're out of our youth, once we're established in the world, reliving the lives of our parents, or reliving or thinking about the future. That, once you have a family, you at least attempt to find that continuity, if unconsciously. I don't, that's just my intuition here. I don't have any stats to back that up, but what do you make of that idea, Ashley? Are you frozen? I think Ashley is not just holding herself very still, but is frozen on the screen. Oh, there, now you're back. Now you're back. But your face was frozen with skepticism for a moment. What do you think?
I did actually freeze. So I
did you hear anything that I said?
I have no idea, but I'm sure everyone at home agreed wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I said, I'll actually repeat it. I said that I think that while we are kind of sold the idea that we need to be the beginning and the end of a new kind of life, that we do think that we're going to break from the past, that often enough, once you get out of your young adulthood, you find that you actually are compelled to repeat, that you are going to take up your, the life of your parents and try to continue that life into the future.
It's funny because you say this with a sense of regret. Like you're supposed to revolutionize all conditions of existence in every generation. And otherwise you've done something really bad. And I find something very distinctly capitalist about that. Even though it's supposed to be like anti-capitalist, it's like we cannot survive except by revolutionizing our conditions of existence. But no, I mean, obviously, yes, you do find yourself doing that, because that is the relationship between the generations. The very basic fact, as Carl Mannheim wrote a long time ago, the basic fact that humans can only play a small part in human history. One human life is just a small part of it. And yet you need to have some continuity. It means that it is a responsibility of each generation to initiate the next one. And that doesn't mean that you simply pass on social norms and so on without any change. As a new generation comes into contact with the ideas and values and so on of the old, they inevitably change them. They change in relation to circumstances. They change in relation to the different experiences and situations of people. Say someone in a city versus the countryside will sort of have passed on to them certain pieces of the collective history of humanity in different ways, and they will interact with these things in different ways. But we have this sense, like, it all starts, like all problems start with socialization, that's really, we pinpointed it. That's it. That's where everything goes wrong. And everybody in the past just effed everything up. And if we just get into that socialization process and fix people, then the next generation won't make the same mistakes. which ironically is a highly neoliberal kind of idea that all problems start at the individual and in their socialization. So if you can intervene there and make them make the right choices, then they'll be fine. And so we're like, oh, we have to. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to go in and like change things at the children's generation. But of course, you know, children, first of all, need to understand and have bequeathed to them something of the collective history of humanity. And we do that in various ways through socialization. But it's almost like we've problematized socialization so much that we no longer believe that there's a whole lot that's worth passing on. And that the really important thing is that we don't pass on. We have like this kind of anti-socialization view of socialization. It's an anti-social socialization or something like that. In fact, there is a sociological term that actually does encapsulate this. And I can't remember if it's something like anti-socialization or something like that. But basically, it's the idea that you socialize the next generation not to pick up the values of the older generation, because that's where the problem started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wonder why it is that we have singled out socialization and cultural norms as the most significant thing that the left faces. That we, you know, there's a history of kind of a cultural turn on the left in the 20th century that you can point to, but why was that so successfully taken up? And I do think it has like maybe some basis in material reality beyond just you know, some ideological convenience to it. So I think as I just had a conversation yesterday with Chris Catrone, which will be coming out in the weeks to come, I think after your next podcast, Ashley, and we talked about how from Freud's time, and this will maybe segue back into the essay, from Freud's time to ours, the character or the nature of psychological complaints changed dramatically. In Freud's time, you had these hysterical symptoms in most of the population. People would come in for treatment. They would have these psychosomatic symptoms. Maybe they would be partially paralyzed in one arm or limp or something. And he could help them overcome these psychosomatic symptoms through his talking cure and overcome their neurosis. Whereas after Freud, or around towards the end of Freud's life, they started to see more melancholia or depression and anxiety, rather than kind of generalized anxiety, rather than psychosomatic symptoms. And Catrone pointed out that this was happening because the sense of self, or as the ego was weakened, the narcissism took more of a hold on people, and the retreat into the self became more pronounced and more common. And so that rather than having a problem of action, a problem based on being neurotic around your own activity, it was just a inward turning and a feeling of generalized instability and weakness that became like a character disorder rather than a disorder of social life, or you know, that was symptomatic. And so I think that this focus on norms, cultural norms, and the passing on of social values has to do with a mistrust of just individual subjects overall. You know, whatever's sourced back to people in their everyday lives is not to be trusted. We don't anyway, that's as far as I can go right now to try to work that out. But what do you think about that this is all a product of the, you know, the death of this attack on masculinity is really just an attack on subjectivity and human power overall, whether it's masculine or feminine?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of sociological research and so on that talks about feminization, not like, I don't mean like from the men's rights movement feminization, but like,
right.
Like health ideals have been feminized, for instance. what used to be very anti-woman kind of ideas, which was, as a woman, you're supposed to be closer to nature, you're supposed to be body conscious, you're irrational, you're emotional, and all of these things that were very insulting toward women, that were used as excuses to keep women out of public life, turned around and became affirmed as positive things that were good for people's health. And it was like, hey, ladies, actually, do you know what? It's great that you're body conscious. It's awesome that you're emotional. That's so good, like but good, actually. I used to talk about this as like all the racist and misogynist shit that people used to say. Now it's sold back to you as like radical but good, actually. You should embrace this. So it's not like we've like raised everybody up or something like that. It's that we knocked everybody else down. And we're supposed to kind of embrace this as, for instance, good for your health. So as a woman, you are supposed to be all of these things, and you should embrace that. And actually, men too should do these things. Mm-hmm. So that's part of it, that there's been this kind of feminization of health on the part of the neoliberal state that wants, that sees so-called feminine virtues and values as good for health, and therefore something that should be generalized to the entire population. And in that, toxic masculinity becomes recast as a health threat. And then there's a growing kind of discourse now within policy, which is that actually women make better workers. And I think we've talked about this a little bit before, where, the way that women are socialized, or at least the ideals that surround women, are more conducive to an office environment or a work environment than those associated with men. So women are socialized to be perfectionist. That's what you want, right? You want someone who's going to stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning to get things right and not just, send it off as it is. I know all of this is like, socially constructed and so on, but to a certain extent, people are socialized into this. I've noticed that, where I'm like, I will like stay up. I'm like, nothing is good enough. And people are like, I remember talking to a male coworker, and he was like, what? You won't sleep at night to get something done? Oh, I've never done that. And I was like, how have you just never done that? Like, what? Anyway, he doesn't care. He's like, it's good enough. Sends it off. No, nothing is ever good enough. Anyway, so these sorts of values are actually quite valued on the part of businesses. And so there's this push now. If you look at policy documents, for instance, on the part of the European Commission, they will talk about work-life balance constantly. And it's always women. You don't see any language until you start digging into the directives. You don't see anything about mothers. Women are important insofar as they are workers. And care brings her away from that. It's like work is what she should be doing. And care and children and so on, that's a distraction. And all these gender norms in society are so bad. We need to break down these gender norms through desocialization, so women understand that their place is in the workplace. Let's get rid of all that crap from the past. And men are fathers now. And this isn't my idea. This is from social policy and the family and so on. But that's one thing that's sort of come out of these policy analyses, is that there's been this shift from mothers to women and from men to fathers, that men are now supposed to be fathers, but also to take on that feminized ideal of what a good mother was. But which was
what they mean is that men are now supposed to be mothers, not that they're supposed to be fathers.
Exactly. So this ideal, which was always very oppressive on the part of women, that you should be intensive, and it's still there, by the way, it hasn't gone away. But this ideal that you should be intensive is now shared out to fathers. And I see this constantly, where people are trying to be critical, and they're like, yeah, this whole intensive thing, it's really bad. So fathers, you should, pick up some of the slack. So we just like spread it out to everybody instead of questioning like how instrumentalized family life has become, how much the what has been heaped on the family and on parents and in terms of work has meant that it's impossible to balance those two. And yet the prerequisite for having a family is that you do balance those things. We're not dealing with these kinds of contradictions. We're just spreading it out. But anyways, this kind of feminized ideal of what a parent is now spread onto men. And the feminized ideal of a good worker becomes an intensive force acting on women as well. I don't know if that's kind of what you were getting at. I think also something that you mentioned was about different kinds of mental disorder or whatever as being kind of representative of different
change in
aspects
our subjectivity, the change in the kind of and the weakening of human subjectivity overall, and the limiting of freedom.
Mhm.
I think one of the things in this article that I might want to criticize is this idea that because women are dominating men in terms of education and employment, the left has a special obligation or need to try to communicate to the unemployed men, primarily out of the fear of them becoming a reactionary force, right? But I would think that actually socialists should take up the task of talking to women workers. They're the workers. Why, if we're going to be organizing people and the majority of the people at work are women, then we should take that reality into account. I mean, I notice on our own channel that mostly men are interested in socialism and Marxism. And I wonder why that is, and what is it that Marxists can do to be more appealing, or maybe that's the wrong way to think of it. Maybe the question is, what kinds of politics do we need to implement in order to change conditions so women can be more interested in their own general emancipation, break out of the framework of trying to figure out how to deal with these demands for intensive parenting and intensive work by sharing it with their husband or blaming the patriarchy, and instead looking to change the conditions of their work and of their life.
Well, we should be kind of clear, like, because these kinds of ideals are valued in the workplace doesn't mean that most workers are women. That's not what's happened.
Well,
In fact,
isn't there an increase amongst the youngest generation of women? Like, women are more often are more likely to have work now than young women are.
Yeah. So when it comes to the younger generations, there's been a mass. In fact, the New York Times just reported on this, I think, a couple of days ago, or maybe like a week ago, about surveys that were showing that the ideal of starting a family is very, very low on people's list, and it's very low on of priorities. It's very low on the list of the older generation in terms of what they want for their children. They say that finding a work and a career is much more important than having a partner and having children. So that's been a massive shift. But yes, so what's happened is there is a questioning of the family massively. And when I say the family, I don't mean like everybody go out and have your patriarchal family. It's not patriarchal, by the way, it's conjugal. But go out and like pair up, man, woman, that's it, 2 kids, that's what you need to do. I'm just saying, the majority of workers, at least up until very, very recently, found the family to be a haven from this stuff. So at the moment, the family has become, and parenting, so the family has become parenting. That's the first important thing to recognize, that family policy morphed into parenting without anybody noticing in about the last 30 years. So it's all about these things that parents are supposed to do. And it is intensive and it is horrible. And nobody wants to do that. I like a lot of people, it's like, see all the stuff that's heaped on families. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to piece out of that. But they have not questioned the intensiveness. That has been totally naturalized. So what is required of a good parent is a so-called good parent is not questioned at all. And so people see that and they're like, that's terrible. They see the tough time, especially the youngest, see the tough time their parents had trying to do everything and be everything for them. And they're like, they were miserable. I was miserable. I want to opt out. And they do. So what's happened is that has been naturalized as the family, and then the family gets rejected. But what that is an ideology of intensive parenting that's come up around the 1970s, in which everything that you do as a parent, it's not just this thing that like all humans have done, or like the majority of humans have done. I mean, generationally, it's just incidental to being a human. It's now incredibly scientized, rationalized, reduced to all of its instrumental functions. And if you don't do this, you are in so much trouble and you fucked up your kids forever. And then you also have the double bind where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So if you do take up the intensive parenting, then you're a helicopter parent. This is Jenny Bristow, by the way, if you're interested in looking up her work. She also works on sociology of generations. But she talks about the double bind. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So you're a helicopter parent if you're intensive, but you have failed your children if you are not intensive. I saw this recently on TikTok. There was a video that went around, or is it like, I don't know, these shorts that go around on every social media these days, where it was like one clip and it was like, don't compliment your children's artwork. That's wrong, because they're going to grow up and they're going to look to other people constantly for external validation. Clip. No. I grew up like this, and my mother never complimented me, and all I wanted to know was that I was good. And a clip. No, that's wrong. Because and there's just literally nothing that you could do that was right. And I've talked about this before with on the other podcast that we did on talking about the sexual revolution and how confused everything has become. Where it's like one of the kind of like progressive things that I did with my daughter, I decided I was going to apologize to her when I made a mistake, because I'm Canadian and I apologize for my existence constantly. So naturally, I took this into parenting. And so I would apologize to her, look, I was wrong, blah, blah. And I have noticed now she doesn't trust me. So she'll be like, is it this, Mom? Or is it that you blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, no, it's this. And I realized that I've robbed her of that certainty and that comfort of the early years before you realize your parent is a human being. That before that, your mother, your parents are omnipotent. They seem to know everything and can do everything. And, you know, they're all knowing, all powerful and all that. And now she doesn't have that. And it's like she's exposed to the dangers and uncertainty. And I robbed her of that. So there's like nothing that you can do that won't screw them up in some way. Anyway, I've just rambled on. Stop me.
No, no. I mean, look, as a parent, I could easily pick up this thread and run with it, because I had a similar kind of problem, especially when I was younger and kind of more anarchist hippie type, but I guess what I'll do is segue into this notion of things being child-led and how it might connect to a tendency to oppose masculinity. That what we're being sold on is the most moral and politically correct kinds of projects that we can take up are those that help people survive, how things as they are, and also that help us feel better about things as they are. So like when it comes to movements that want to put the child at the center and have the family, say, be child-led, what that's about is making sure the child feels happy, and you put the child's feelings at the center, which of course means that the more mature capacity for critical thinking and long-term planning and an understanding of the need for self-discipline, all of that is jettisoned. I mean, of course, it can't really be, because you're being demanded, the parents are being told to do everything, meaning like, work all day, really intensively, dedicate your life to your job, and always be present at home to raise your kids. Of course, what that also does is leave out the space for you to go out and maybe engage in the world beyond your family and yourself. Right.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. Yeah. So this is the thing. This is what I think a movement ought to kind of imbibe from the experience of a lot of decades of the personal is political. I think the private sphere should be understood as something that is important, but incidental. That is, it is important because it's the place where you let it all hang out, where you test out ideas, where you have your haven in a heartless world. You knew I was gonna say it.
Yeah, I love that book.
And this is how most people, if you look at surveys, this is how they still perceive their families. It is a place away from the instrumentalization, the rationalization, the calculable ends-based everything of the outside world, and it's a place where you can just kind of live. And that's being almost gone now. That's being taken over. The ideal is that everything you do as a parent should be instrumentalized, but most people don't see things like that. Most people don't. Thankfully, if you want to remain sane, most people don't read a million parenting books and don't have a parenting expert in their ear all the time, because if you did, you'd lose your mind. But most people see their family as a haven away from this, as it should be. So the private sphere is important. You need it. You need that private sphere. I think it's an important kind of development of modernity, but it is incidental. And I think what's happened is we have kind of put too much scope or too much causality on the private sphere, that everything kind of begins there in this kind of dark area where I can't see, and bring it out into the open so we can figure out what you're doing, and you're reproducing all these bad problems. Bring it to light, private sphere must be destroyed. And I think this is accidentally kind of over meshes with a kind of neoliberal ideology that wants to do the same thing, all the more to surveil you, all the more to, the sort of Foucauldian idea of like the confession as an important aspect of surveillance, that everything should be out in the open so that it can be moved back onto a particular kind of script. So we want to kind of avoid that and recognize that the private sphere is something that should be defended, and we shouldn't feel ourselves being swindled by the people who are screaming, think of the children and sex with so that you open up the private sphere. I think it's something that should be protected. And I know a lot of people on the left are not on side with that, but I think that definitely puts you offside of most working class people who are in families, at least. Mm-hmm. And now the public sphere, on the other hand, is where it's at. This is where you exercise your important agency. And this is what previous kind of movements had often been about, that a lot of the anti-family kind of stuff was very marginal in the 60s and 70s, and that most people kind of didn't give it a huge amount of thought. But the reason why you gave it a ton of thought, or when people did give it a lot of thought, it was when it held women back from having a space in the public sphere. So it was about trying to reduce the amount of time that women would spend confined to the public sphere against their will, in this sort of realm of necessity, and open up the realm of freedom. And I think that is still a worthwhile goal. And part of that is still things like decent and affordable childcare, which was a demand of feminist movements for a long time. At the same time, I think that should people wish to care for their children without childcare, I think that should also be an option that should be supported. But so I think it's generally about keeping this division between the public and the private, to recognize the private sphere is something that must be defended, and the public sphere is a place where we exercise our agency and can control the future through conscious will, not like through socialization. Maybe incrementally we change people and then somehow, some way they have the right values, then revolution comes. No, we, as we are today, as Lenin said, we want revolution as people are today, not as we hope they will be, not as they were, but as they are today. And that happens in public through argument and debate and convincing people.
Well, it seems to me that again, to go back to this idea that masculinity itself is a problem that is being pushed forward by liberal progressives and technocrats. That the reason, another reason for that is because that public sphere. I mean, on the one hand, you're right, the private sphere is being undermined as well, and we're being constantly surveilled, and we're being asked to open up our private lives to these big public institutions in a variety of ways, whether it's on Facebook when they're collecting our data, or by someone from social services, or all manner of ways. But the public realm is also no longer to be led by individuals. There's this kind of bureaucratic state, with an anonymous bureaucratic state, that people by experts who want that is kind of thought to be running the show, and the values that they label as toxic, because of their masculinity, like stoicism, or the inability to respond to your emotions, or even a lack of empathy, maybe. All these things are necessary if you're going to break with the commonly held opinions or the status quo operations of the world and form a new kind of opinion. You have to be able to stand up as an individual and with some stoicism to be able to resist insults and pressures, social pressures, and in order to break with society as it is, in order to try to do something more radical. So it seems to me that traditionally masculine character traits are absolutely necessary for the left.
Yes, exactly. That's the point that I was trying to make when I was saying that all of these traits that used to be associated with femininity and were insults are now being generalized to the population. It's not like that's the way women are and then men are like that. It's that these were the things that kept women down, kept them out of the public sphere where power is actually held and organized and can be, used to do things. And now what's happened, it's not like, we what we're saying is no one is suitable for public life. The public sphere is not a place
for human beings.
For human beings,
right?
No, it's and I wrote a comment on this as well. I was thinking about it. I wanted to pull a clip from a conversation that we had a couple weeks ago, and I just commented on the video so that I could freeze my thought there. But it was last week, I think. Stefan was talking about how AI had this kind of potential to displace some roles, some oppressive roles that capitalists kind of take on. And I thought that was really interesting because I've had this idea bouncing around my head for a while that I haven't written about, but I probably will at some point. I need to develop it. I've brought it up a couple of times here, but it's good for this conversation as well, which is that we have our authoritarians now are flawed. We're living in the era of the flawed authoritarian. So if you look at like the way that I was looking at like mindfulness discourses, and they were like, no, it's great. We all find it difficult to manage our emotions. We all could use some mind control, And they're like, all of us, me too, me too. And they say this all the time. And like the behavioral nudge people, the nudge unit in the UK, they have these like this behavioral insight team that it uses behavioral psychology to like nudge people to making the right decisions. They talk like that too. They're like, oh, well, we all, like even me, I have trouble when I go to a party when someone puts the out chips. Why don't we just put out carrots? That would be great. And everyone's like, yeah, okay. But that's how they do it, right? They're like, me too. All human beings are like this. It's almost like authoritarianism isn't bad per se. It's that we can't really trust any humans to rise above the rabble. It's all rabble. It's rabble all the way down, which is a step back, even for misanthropists. Obviously fascism was based on this idea of like the strong man that can rise above the rabble. Now it's everybody. It's not like everybody's rabble. The progressive thing was to raise all the masses to the point of humanity, capable of exercising reason, having a place in public life, capable of making decisions about the direction of the economy and society. All human beings have that capability. And there are some traits that make that more likely to happen. A certain amount of stoicism, a stiff upper lip when somebody comes at you. It is hard. I recognize that. I don't like getting insulted all the time. But that's what public life is. That's when you put yourself in the public sphere, you kind of put yourself in the way of that. And I bitch and whine about it every now and then. But that's me being weak. But the point is to raise everybody up. And what we have done is we have pushed everyone down. We have generalized what were once racist and sexist stereotypes to all of humanity. We should have gone the other direction. Everybody elevated to the level of human, not just some people.
Right. I totally agree with you on everything you just said. I want to point out
which means I'm going to get mean comments because people are like, wait, no, I don't want to agree.
Yeah. Well, we welcome, just when you get those mean comments, keep that stiff upper lip.
No, what you do
that
is
self-control. Be stoical.
No. That's true, yeah. And in reality, you lay down in bed at night and you have the little voices that are like, all the things that I said today. Should have said that. No, but when you go out into public, it is part of public life. And as much as it sucks, that is kind of the way that it is. However,
and when you get to be in your 50s, Ashley, what happens is by the end of the day, you're thinking, did I have a conversation earlier? What did I say? So you don't get to bash yourself about that. So someone says, who can resist Doug's CD collection of intellectual 1990s contempo casual? I just wanted to, this is what's going on in the chat. So we're being taken apart for our choices, lifestyle choices. You know, I need to just throw a tarp so that my life is private. I want, those
that's
CDs,
what I did.
those CDs often end up in my car. And I recently I bought a 4 CD collection. So I know that, I'm way behind the times, but I actually am still buying CDs because I'm driving a 20th century car with a CD player in it. And I bought United States Live by Laurie Anderson. It's 4 CDs. It's excellent. I took a drive to Eugene. It's great to be able to listen to it. So, bash me all you like, but I like the CDs. And if I could get an 8-track player in my car, I'd have that. So, okay. I don't know what I'm talking about now. So,
okay,
yes.
so going
back, getting me back on track. I'm sorry. I got completely distracted by silly.
I decided today I'm not going to listen to the chat because you know what happened to me? Listen, we're talking about this right now. Okay. I am fiery and I have opinions, all right? And I get mad.
Good for you, Ashley. I support that.
That's who I am, all right? And I have noticed that
you go, girl.
As people have been criticizing me, someone's like, oh, you giggle too much. Like, oh, fuck, do I giggle too much? And so I do. And I think the reason why I do that is because I'm saying something that I think is controversial. So I laugh to soften it. And I've noticed that a lot of people will do this. Anyways, so then I stop laughing. And then something else happened. So then I'm like, blah, blah, blah. And then I did like a Sky newspaper review. And I was like, and the woman like complimented my sweater. And I was like, it's coral. I just carried on. And the producer was like, Ashley, what the fuck happened to you? And I was like, man, I took in too much of this shit. So yeah, part of being in public life is that you don't read the comments in the comment section. It's really bad for you.
But
Prince Harry, I know you're watching because I just said your name. Stop reading the comments.
Yeah, no,
sorry.
But we often do want to respond to comments, especially in the Parrot Room Patreon streams, because we want to. I've read
I'll always respond to the patrons.
Creating a community and a sense of connection with the people who are paying you is a good idea. So that's what we'll do in the Patreon stream in just a little bit. I do want to encourage people to read the essay by Arturo. I do think that we have, at the very least, a PR problem on the left, on the left, like, let's start the left with the DSA and then go left from there. That there's an association between Marxism and I guess soy boy anti-masculinity or something like that. And we need to resist it. We need to be stoical in the face of both those on the right who would attack us as being, not manly enough, and those on the left who would go after us for, being a toxic men, even when we're women. And so, otherwise, we're never going to develop our own project if we're just constantly engaging in battle about these cultural issues with the right and the progressive liberals, so-called progressive.
No,
go ahead.
I think that's exactly right. And then you kind of in a more serious way of like reading the comment section, you do find yourself, because obviously when you right publicly, it's dialogical, right? So you get pushback on certain things, and then you will hold back. So, you know, people will come at you and be like, you know, what did somebody say to me once? Like, oh, if you're talking about women, shouldn't you bring in the emotionality? And then it becomes, you know, incredibly insulting and reifying. You reify these sort of gender norms. So kind of being conscious of not doing that. But what that's what winds up happening, right? You temper every single time. You temper your analysis to fit what these kinds of middle of the road people think is a proper kind of radicalism, which is all about communication and how you communicate. That said, I think that a certain amount of critique and sort of deeper critique is important for deepening your ideas. So
My problem with reading the chat while you talk is I get a little distracted, and they make me laugh. These people in the chat.
I know. It's like, Doug, why are you laughing? For God's sake.
Someone says, agreed, Sublation should adopt a firm pro-hunk stance. I don't know, that just means funny. Sorry.
But what I was going to say is I really believe in peer review. I really believe in, like, you know, through rigorous kind of engagement with ideas. And when people are kind of come by and critique you honestly and in good faith, I think that's really important. Just as we have to remember when we do that. And I do regret, actually, a few weeks back when we were talking about Zizek and that piece that was really critical of Zizek. I used that article as a jumping off point to complain about Zizek's critiques of Zizek in general. And I said I think a lot of people have a certain amount of professional jealousy. And when I watched it back, it sounded like I was just really ripping into this particular author, and I felt really bad about that. And that I probably should have been a bit more charitable. Anyways, but then again, you know, you read Marx, and Marx is like a dick when he comes to his opponents.
Yeah, but I think anytime you're engaging with someone's actual written work, and when they're making an attempt to be to offer sincere, good faith critique, you need to, you know, be charitable. That's like a standard. The charitable reading. Read your opponent as if they're presenting the very best version of their argument. Don't find a way to interpret what they're saying so it's silly. Find the best interpretation you can. On the other hand, with that particular article, he was so egregious when it came to not being a charitable reader of Zizek and trying to find the craziest interpretations of Zizek that he could, and, you know, along the way, making, I think, some political mistakes of his own that had nothing to do with how he's interpreting Zizek. Yeah, it's okay to throw a couple of barbs his way. He deserves it. He brought he certainly threw plenty of unjustified, uncharitable barbs towards Zizek in a way that was not at all comradely. So no, don't beat yourself up about that, and just look forward to being in your 50s where you won't even remember what you said last week. So
I would like. Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Well, we're at just about 55 minutes. So why don't we wrap it up here and pretty soon, and then go over to the other stream. But yeah, I don't want to cut you short with because you are, you know, filled with ideas and passionate.
And I'm
about
fiery.
Them, and you're fiery. And so I don't want to get in your way. Go ahead.
Feel the need to temper that. Anywho, no, I wanted to kind of end on this idea that well, I'm working on my own podcast at the moment, so look forward to that. And one of the things that I've been working on is the idea of
and your podcast is called Based AF. Is that right? That's the name of the podcast.
Which totally does not match the level of depth that I have gone into. I should be like, you know, base. But anyway, I'm like.
And AF stands for Ashley Frawley. It's Based Ashley Frawley. That's what that stands for. Okay.
But one of the things that I wanted to think about is how a lot of what comes to us, and anyone who knows anything about Foucault will hear Foucault a lot in this, but a lot of what comes to us as freedom, that we even avow as freedom, is and a way of sort of doing away with the old, are these new forms of social control. And if you think about anybody as a young adult, do you ever read the book The Giver? Probably did. But there's this sort of scene where every night apparently they sit around the table, and it's this ritual in the society where they all confess their feelings. And the reason why they all confess their feelings is because it allows them to put anything that could be dangerous out on the table so that it can be controlled. So the boy Jonas, he says, I had a dream about my friend Fiona, and it gave me these feelings that 12-year-old boy that I wasn't sure I should enjoy. And the parents were like, oh, that's very good. And then that alerts them that they need to give him pills to suppress his sexual yearnings. So in this particular society, it is sexuality that's a threat, whereas in Brave New World, it's love that's a threat, and you should have sex with everyone and have no attachments. But anyways, these things are obviously, dystopias are quite complex, but they are obviously to a certain extent warnings of what something that is supposed to be good, something that is supposed to be freeing, can become down the road, that it masks some deeper sense of control. And I wish more often we would remember that when we think we're being progressive, and when it's like we're railing against things that have been dead. We've been fighting things that have been dead for like 50, 60 years. Some people are like, oh yeah, toxic masculinity, stiff upper lip, that's bad. I'm against that. That makes me progressive. So then what do? You subvert it. Let's have feminized ideals and confess. We should all be open. I use the example, a lot of my sisters showed me pictures where they put these stickers, the management sent out these stickers that was like mad, angry, frustrated, and you're supposed to put them on you throughout the day. So stressed. So then you walk around and you've got your feelings there, and the management is like, this is so great. We're breaking down barriers. And this,
yeah,
and
of
course,
we can find out which one of these people needs to be fired by looking at this.
Exactly. But it's like, why do you feel stressed? Do you want to talk about that? So all to bring it back in line with the power structures of society. So just beware that the thing you think is exerting power over you may not be the thing that you should rail against. It may be your own attempts at freedom that have turned around and started to control you.
I want to say one last thing before we go, and then we'll sign off. But I saw in the chat that someone said that there was some transphobic comments were in the chat. I didn't see those comments. There's just me and Ashley on the stream today. We don't have anyone in the background moderating the chat. I rely on all of you people, all of you good communists, to be civilized with one another. So do that. Damn it. That's your father figure chastising all of you.
Good. They need that. They're like, I'm full now.
That's right. And there, I'll leave it at that. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you in the Patreon.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases